right, so welcome. My name is Savannah. We're going to be doing a cooking demo here along with some knife skills and then talking a little bit about flavor balancing. So before we get started, just want to tell you a little bit about Align Modern Health. So we are an integrative and functional medicine healthcare provider. So what that means is we try to get to the root cause of an issue instead of just focusing on treating the symptoms. A few of our services include chiropractic care, clinical massage, acupuncture, functional medicine, and then of course, clinical nutrition. So just a little bit about me. I'm a registered dietitian here at Align Modern Health. So I completed my degree in culinary nutrition at Johnson & Wales University. What that means is that I have an associate's in culinary arts and then a bachelor's in nutrition. I then went on to my dietetic internship at Tulane University in New Orleans. And then after, I went to India for a period of time, worked at a retreat center there in the kitchen, learned a little bit more about Ayurvedic medicine and nutrition. I was then a personal chef for a few years, and I'm also a certified Kundalini yoga instructor. So today what we're going to be doing, what we're going to be cooking, is a vegan collard green wrap, and we're going to pair that with a miso tahini dressing, or a dip. You will get the recipe at the end of the demo, so you will get a copy of it. And please type in any questions that you might have throughout the demo in the Q&A box, and then we'll address them at the end. But yeah, let's get started. So we're gonna get started with some knife skills. So we're gonna first talk about how to cut an onion. And this is a great practical thing to learn how to cut, because we put an onions in basically, everything, a lot of dishes. So when we think about how we're going to cut the onion, we need to think about what exactly we're using it for. So I'm going to teach you two different ways: how to dice it and then how to julienne it. Julienne it's basically like thin strips, matchbook or matchstick type strips would be a julienne cut. So when we're thinking about, for example, putting onions in a salad, we wouldn't want like the small dices because we wouldn't be able to pick it up with our fork. But if we have the strips, it's a lot easier to grab with our fork. So the cut, you need to think about the practicality of that. So we'll be demoing both. When we're looking at the onion, the root is growing down here, and then this would be the top of the onion. So when we do cut, especially the dice, we want to make sure that the root isn't still intact, because that basically keeps the onion together. If we cut off the root, then when we try to cut the onion, it might all fall apart, and we don't want that. So what we're going to do to start is cut off the top of the onion here. And what you can do, so we don't want these peels here. So you can either do that in the compost or the trash, but these pieces of onion are actually really great ways, something to keep, so you can use as stock or broth later. So what you can do is like any carrot peels, any pieces of like mushroom or bell pepper, or like little onion scraps, you can keep them in a Ziploc, a big Ziploc bag or something like that in the freezer, keep adding to it, and then eventually use that as a broth. Great way to save money and utilize some of the pieces of, your vegetables that you don't typically use. So then we're going to cut the onion in half. Again, trying to keep the root intact so we can keep the onion intact, because if we cut it in half the other way, then it might start falling apart as soon as we try to dice it. I'm going to take off these couple of the layers. And then when we are chopping the onion, let's get all this first. So when we are chopping the onion, we want to think about how we're holding our knife and what type of knife we are using. And this goes for anything that you're chopping, all of your produce that you're chopping. So this is a chef's knife. This is the most versatile knife in the kitchen. So something that you want to go to. This would be your first go-to for a lot of like anything that you're chopping, basically. Which I do see a lot of people going to their paring knives. The chef's knife is just more efficient. So once you get the hang of using it and you get practice and you're using it more often, then it becomes a lot more efficient. And that's what we want to think about whenever we're chopping things as well. What's the most efficient? So we can get in and out and not spend hours in the kitchen. When we are holding the knife, we want to hold it towards the neck of the knife. So the neck of the knife is right between the blade and then the handle. You get the most control over it when you're grasping it at the neck. So some people, I notice, put their index finger on the top. We just don't get a lot of control over the knife when we put our index finger on, and it can go back and forth. So we want to really grasp it towards the top. When you're making cuts, what we want to think about is a nice gentle gliding motion of the knife. So it's not really coming up off of the cutting board very often. We're not going like that very much, but we are gently gliding back and forth and back and forth. So when you start practicing, some more chopping and cutting of produce, you can just practice this motion in the beginning. That's helpful. Another thing we want to think about when we are chopping any produce is the claw. So we don't want our fingers, to get cut, or our fingers anywhere in the vicinity of the blade. So when you do the claw and we're cutting something, the blade really just goes on the knuckles to keep your fingers safe. So let's start. We're going to start with the dices. So basically, you're going to put the palm of your hand on the onion. I'm going to make 2 or 3, depending on how large the onion is, horizontal cuts along the side. I'll put the top on. We're going to do a couple of horizontal cuts. And you don't want to go all the way. Let's say about like 3/4 of the way through the onion. It might start falling apart if you go all the way to the end. So we're just going to do a couple cuts right there. Next, we're going to turn the root of the onion away from you and follow the there's natural lines across the onion. So again, we're cutting 3/4 of the way in, not all the way in, tilting the knife, and we're just going to make small cuts following the natural line of the onion. And you can make these cuts as big or as small as you like. The smaller the cuts, the smaller the dice, the larger the dice. So after, just take some of these out. Okay, so after you have those cuts on the onion, then we're going to face the root to the left. And we're gonna start cutting down. So I'm using my claw, using this motion, and we're cutting down. Something to think about when you are cutting too is kind of moving along with the, you're not moving with the product. You're not moving yourself or the knife with the product. You are moving the product you're cutting. It's gonna be easier instead of like kind of moving yourself. You're just moving the product. But here we have our nice, you can see that, our nice little dices of onion. So I'm gonna save that. And this is a bench scraper. It's actually really nice if you're making big amounts of product or produce to pick up. You can also use the back of your knife. You don't want to use the blade of your knife because that can dull the blade if you continuously pick up stuff like this. Okay. So the other cut we're going to do is the julienne. We want to cut, in this case, we want to cut the root off. So we're going to make a cut on the root. And then, so we have both sides off. Then we're just going to follow the natural lines of the onion around. And when you're starting at the bottom, we want to tilt the knife. So it's not like straight cut, because if it was a straight cut like this, you'll get a big piece like that. So we want to tilt it to make sure that it's small pieces. When it gets a little wobbly towards the end, you can tip that over and then start from the side again. And we get cuts looking like this. So if you're like caramelizing onions, if you're cutting onions in a salad, we want cuts like that as the julienne. So we're actually not going to be using onions in the collard green wrap. Just wanted to show you that. So let's go ahead and move on to the cucumber. So the cucumber, I already have like a half of a cucumber. We're going to be doing, we're going to be using this for the wrap. So I want to make like matchstick style cuts. So whenever we're thinking about cutting any type of vegetable, if we're like doing the matchstick style or if we're dicing, the way to think about the progression of it would be to first cut them into planks. So whatever, you know, if you're cutting carrot, if you're cutting cucumber, try to cut them into planks first. And then matchstick, or then strips, and then you dice. So planks, strips, dice. So we'll talk about, you know, how we do that too. So this cucumber, anything that you are cutting as well, you don't want it to, like for example, tomato or something round, you don't want it to be wobbling while you're trying to cut it. If you can, cut like a more of a flat surface and keep it steady on the cutting board, just so you're not wobbling around is helpful. So I'm gonna make these cuts in the cucumber. Just gonna stand it up. So these are my planks. All right, so these are my planks. And you can line them up like this. And then what I'm gonna do is cut them into the sticks. So now I have these sticks of the cucumber. And I'm gonna put these over here because I wanna keep them for my wrap. but I'll show you the dices. So we have the sticks, and we turn them over, and we have our dices. And really depending on how big or small you would want the dices, depends on like how large or small you're making your planks. So if you want, bigger dices, larger planks, larger strips, then in turn larger dices. If we want smaller, everything would be a bit smaller to size it down. So with that, let's go ahead and get started on our wrap. So with this collard green wrap, I want to talk a little bit about flavor balancing. So we have 5 different flavors. There is salty, sweet, bitter, sour, and then the 5th flavor is something that's not as commonly known, but that's umami. So that's going to be like a very earthy, savory, helps to round out the dish. That type of flavor. So some examples of umami would be like tomato paste, Parmesan cheese, mushrooms, and in our case, miso. So anything that's a little bit more earthy, savory, is an umami flavor. Sometimes the salty and umami are the same. So in our case, we're using miso in the tahini dressing or the tahini dip, and that's going to be our salty and umami together. So when we are thinking about any type of flavor balancing for a meal or for a dish, we want to put together at least a couple of different flavors, say at least 2, because we don't want something that's going to be completely sour, completely bitter, completely sweet. You get more of a diversity, you get a little bit more of a improved taste sensation when you mix a few different flavors together. So for example, and there's a few different ways to help cut the bitterness if it is too bitter, or cut the sourness of a particular dish. So for example, if we're talking about green leafy vegetables, they're notoriously a bit bitter. So stuff like Swiss chard, dandelion greens are very bitter, collard greens. So if that's too bitter for you, what you can do is either add a little bit of sweetness to it or a little bit of sour acidity. So typically, in a lot of recipes that you'll see of collard greens or any green leafy vegetable, if it's sauteed or cooked, you'll add a little bit of lemon juice at the end, splash of vinegar at the end, and that acidity helps to cut the bitterness a bit. If we're thinking about something sweet to add in, tomatoes, add a little bit of sweetness as well as some of that acidity, so that can be helpful. Or something natural, could be like caramelized onions. And the caramelization really brings out the sweetness under the onion. So that can be added to dishes as a sweet component without needing to add sugar or anything like that. But there's also natural sweeteners like maple syrup, honey, that type of thing. So thinking of at least, a couple of flavors put together. For the purposes of really bringing this point home, in the collard green wrap, we're going to be bringing all of the 5 flavors together in one dish. So what we have is, this is our sweet. This is some carrots. I zoodled the carrots, but what you can do is also just take a peeler and peel the first layer off, but then just keep peeling the carrot and it'll come off in thin strips. You can use that as well. But I added carrots, there's some sesame seeds, a little bit of honey, and green onions in this. So the carrots are already like naturally pretty sweet. I just add a little bit of honey, just a little extra. And then the green onions and the sesame seeds are kind of more flavor components in that. My acidity or sour would be some red cabbage, and this is going to be marinated in some rice vinegar. So I literally just added the cabbage and the vinegar. I mean, I would leave it at least like an hour or so, or you can add it and then, you know, quickly add it into the wrap. Another, what you can do, another option would be to pickle the red cabbage. So a quick pickle is actually fairly easy. So what you do is add equal parts vinegar, water, add a little bit of salt, a little bit of sugar, and then any flavor additives. That could be garlic, that could be dill, that could be peppercorn, anything like that. Bring it to a boil, add it over whatever you're pickling, wait a couple hours, and then you have your pickle. So that's a quick pickle. Other pickles take, you know, months or weeks to pickle, but you could do that. And that would be the vinegar, would be my acidity. And then as far as the bitterness, we have our beautiful collard green leaf. So that's all the green leafy vegetables, you know, would be more of a bitter. So that would be my bitterness. And then cucumbers are kind of just there for the fresh and crunch. My protein is going to be some white beans, and I added a little bit of cilantro, some salt, a little squeeze of lemon juice, and then some extra virgin olive oil to it as well. So that's just a little bit more flavor added to it. And then my umami, my salty, is going to be the miso. And that we're going to talk about that, but that's with the dip or the tahini dressing. So we have all of these, you know, flavors coming together. And I added white beans as a protein. You don't necessarily have to. I mean, you can add chicken, you can add shrimp, you can have firm tofu if you want. Any combination would be fine. So let's go ahead and start putting this wrap together. So collard green leaves and Swiss chard leaves as well are very big leaves that are great for wrapping things up in. There's not a whole lot of other like green leafy vegetables that could do this, but you could probably do the Swiss chard leaf, the collard green leaf, usually pretty big. So what we want to do is cut the stem. You don't have to cut all of it, but we want to cut the really like hard pieces of the stem off, because when we start to roll it up, it's going to be less pliable if it has this hard stem on. So just gonna cut on either side. I'm gonna take the stem off. So now we have our wrap. So I'm gonna add some of the beans to it. And I put like about a quarter cup or so in the recipe of, you know, how much we want of each thing. It kind of depends on the size of the collard green wrap as well. So you can play around with it. You know, if it's a fairly big wrap, you can put a little bit more. Or if it's small, then you can put a little bit less. We want it like fairly stuffed. And then our carrots in. And then we have our cucumbers. So it's kind of like we're wrapping it up into a burrito. Okay, so when we wrap it, we want to pull the sides in. So we're going to pull the sides in. We're going to pull the the bottom piece over, kind of tug it in a little bit so it makes it nice and tight. And then we're gonna roll it, tug it, roll it again, and it comes into this nice burrito looking thing. So then we're going to cut the wrap. I have a plate right here. So I'm gonna cut the wrap. And if you like made it pretty tight, then it's not gonna fall apart. But we can see the inside full of this beautiful different colors, which really we eat with our eyes. But so we want to make it, you know, our dishes bright and colorful and exciting instead of just like plain or all, you know, one color. And as far as like a health perspective, you know, you've probably heard the term eat the rainbow. We definitely want to get as much variety as we can within our diet, as much color as we can, because we're getting different phytonutrients, little plant chemicals that have various health benefits in different colored fruits and vegetables and just overall plant foods. So color is something to think about whenever you're making a dish. But yeah, so I'm gonna put that there. And then let's go ahead and make our tahini dressing. So tahini is a sesame seed paste, and it's pretty commonly found, so you should be able to find it in most grocery stores. So I'm gonna dip the tahini right in the bowl. And this is about half a cup of tahini. I'm gonna add my miso, and my miso is 2 teaspoons. This is a light miso, so you have darker misos, you have lighter misos. Darker misos have more of like a depth in flavor. I chose the lighter miso because it's the same color, similar color to the tahini, so it's not gonna change the color so much. But miso is basically fermented soybean paste. You can use they have chickpea miso, they have rice miso. So soy, if you have an issue with soy, then you can use either one of those alternatives. And then we're gonna also add about 2 tablespoons of lemon juice to this. So we have our miso, our lemon juice, our tahini, and we're gonna start stirring it up. So I love tahini because it is great, something creamy. So if you love like creamy dressings, but you don't want the mayonnaise or the sour cream, the tahini can be a really nice option. It's such a nice, unique flavor as well. So as you notice, there we go. So after just a couple of stirs, my tahini started kind of season up. So it's more like a paste right now, which is fine if you want to just keep it as a paste. I mean, you can make a paste and add it to the wrap instead of a dip. If you're using it for something else, you can use that. But this is common, so don't freak out if you make any tahini dressing. We're just gonna add a little bit of cold water to it to thin it out. So this is a 1/4 cup of the water. You can, depending on how thin you want it, so if you want to make it more of like a thin dressing, then you can use more. So really just water until you get the desired consistency. And it comes up. So just a few more stirs. I mean, you can also add all of this to the blender if you want to blend it up. You don't need to stir it. I'm just going to make it a little looser. Okay. So I think this is a nice consistency for a dip. So here we have our tahini dip now. It's very nice and smooth, kind of like falls off the spatula. So you could definitely use that, or if you wanted it thinner, you can make it thinner. So with this wrap, just gonna put a little bit of the tahini dressing on the side. Again, if you wanted to put it in, you can put it in, or you can just use it as a dip. So here we have our collard green wrap with the tahini dressing. Just a couple points I would say. You definitely are able to switch up the protein if you want. You don't have to use the white beans. You can do any other type of bean. You could add hummus to it. You can add like your chicken, your shrimp, your firm tofu. You could also switch up the flavors a bit if you want as well. So what my flavoring would be like the tahini, or just sesame seeds in general. My flavoring would be the sesame seeds, the cilantro, rice vinegar, miso. So I took kind of like a more Asian style approach with this. But if you wanted to make it more of like a Mediterranean wrap, you could add dill, parsley as the herbs instead of cilantro. You can use red wine vinegar instead of rice vinegar, and switch up the spices and the herbs a bit to make it your own. And that goes for like if you're trying to make any type of dish. You can keep the same method of preparation. You can keep similar ingredients, but then just the herbs, the spices, the flavoring agents, you can change and work around so it's something new. So that's all I have for you today. And I know I see some questions popped up in the Q&A, so we'll go ahead and take some questions now.
Hi, Chef Savannah. Our first question comes from Lark. Lark asked, what do you think about wearing mesh gloves when cutting?
Yeah, I think you can use mesh gloves. Yeah, especially if you're, kind of prone to cutting yourself, or like accidentally, if that's a common thing. I mean, you could definitely use that. I would suggest, making sure that you take some of the safety precautions first too, but you could definitely use the gloves.
We have another question from Nympha. Nympha is wondering, is miso salty and the concern is because of high blood pressure?
Yeah, so miso does have more salt. So overall with high blood pressure, we want to focus on getting a lot of like potassium-rich foods and just overall abundance of fruits and vegetables. You can use, you can just omit the miso. You don't necessarily need to use the miso, but it is a bit saltier. So that would actually be your salt component of a meal. So you could use like a teaspoon of it just to get a little bit of the umami, a little bit of the saltiness, but not salt anything else. And that wouldn't add too much extra salt.
We have a question from Susan asking about keeping the collard green leaf raw versus having cooked it in some way to make it easier to wrap.
You could definitely blanch it. So just put it in like hot boiling water for a minute, and then or a couple seconds, however long it takes to become a little bit more pliable and like wilt a little bit, and then you can use that to wrap, after it's cooled. That's fine.
Thank you. If there are any more questions, we encourage you to type them into the Q&A feature. Otherwise, I think that ends our presentation for today. Thank you so much for joining us. If you do have additional questions or would like to know anything more about Aligned Modern Health, you are welcome to give us a call at 312-216-2452, or you can visit us at alignedmodernhealth.com. Again, thank you to Chef Savannah. Thank you to all of you for joining us. A recording of this presentation will be emailed to everybody along with the recipe. Thank you again so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.